What did children really say? There have been many studies in the past 50 years about how early communicators use language. One of the first and most famous study is by Roger Brown in his book, First Language, The Early Stages. How many of you are familiar with Brown's stages? Okay, most SLPs are. But Brown's stages have now become everybody's stages. And I just got the psycholinguistic text that's being used in communication sciences and disorders at Pitt. And they're still using Brown. I bought a copy. I just wanted to be sure that I wasn't giving you stuff that was in any way dated. But Brown, it's what they do is they do different people's renditions of Brown, or as quoted from Brown. And basically, this stuff has formed the bedrock of our knowledge about how children acquire language. In Brown, we find a dominance of core vocabulary, and there's an absence of nouns. Okay, this is stage one. Did you see that? You know, I gave you a copy of that. By the way, when you're actually reading First Language, Brown does not list a page of examples of stage one. They're buried in essays. And you know, he'll be talking about stage four. He said, whereas in stage one we find all gone use non-oppositionally, and that's a technical term. You know, so where these things are all buried through Brown. It's like going through a maze. How many of you have been forced to read First Language? Okay. Veterans. Yes. Brown died. He died about 18 months ago. He was 79. He had renounced all his work and said it was wrong. No. Excuse me. You know, St. Thomas Aquinas' dying words. Many of you remember how important St. Thomas Aquinas was in Catholic theology, and in fact, in many ways today still is. And his dying words were, "All I have written is chaff." And one adds carefully to note that he didn't say any of it was wrong. Okay, the mean length of utterance, 1.75 words, and the main theme for this period of language acquisition is agent, action, and object. And look at the examples here. Find it. See our little pivots? Hide it, fix it, mine. All gone, up here, over there. Now, how do you know this is being a syntax? Kids don't say here up. They already have a set switch in there that knows that the preposition goes before the adverb. And you don't get them saying, "It's here up, Daddy." They say, "It's up here." And these are things in which they do not make an error. It's just remarkable what we've learned about language. And Chomsky is the one who showed everybody this, and he turned around the course of language studies in the early 1950s. He made the old senior linguists sound like stuttering chickadees. And Brown was directly dependent upon Chomsky. Okay. What's the morphology like here? Now, morphology means word forms. Well, we have mine, we have a past participle, an irregular past participle. We have up here, over there, which is, you know, how you combine those unbound morphemes there. So that's pretty nice. I mean, you know, mine, you know, is kind of neat at that stage. By the way, I was in Perth, Australia, eating in an outdoor Italian restaurant after an all-day seminar, and I was really whooped. And it wasn't this seminar, but it was a seminar about early language. And all day long we did early language, and this little kid in the adjoining booth, we were outside, adjoining table, grabbed one of the chairs and he yelled 4 times loudly, "Mine." He said, "Mine, mine, mine, mine." And the speech therapist with me said, "Bruce, you've got to find out how old he is." Well, we asked, and his birthday was going to be in 2 months, so it was 22 months. And he was he was really richly crying out mine and was very happy. Um, that's pivot. That's one word, and it's a pivot, and it means this is mine. You know, he'll be saying more soon. But that's how he's starting. And now our kids with disabilities, when we start them out, we give them chocolate cake. I'm not kidding. You know, we do. That's a high motivational noun. Chocolate cake. It may be a high motivational noun, but it has very little to do with how children use language. It is, in fact, an adult hypothesis of what will excite and entertain the child. I think we need to know what children really say, because the language they really use, I think, will be the motivating language. By the way, in terms of schedules of reinforcement, if you have chocolate cake on the board and the kid hits chocolate cake and it's not produced immediately, the next time the kid hits chocolate cake and it's not produced immediately, he'll never hit it again. There's no quicker way to suppress behavior than non-reinforcement, of it, and other behaviors are also commonly being reinforced. And so, if you have all these food items, kids won't hit them. I think there are a million reasons why chocolate cake is not a good first word. Okay. Is there syntactical awareness? Well, there certainly seems to be a budding subject-verb-objectness here. And we see this is probably some form of a subject, and then there's find it. Okay. And see daddy, there's verb and object. Okay. What word appears more frequently than any other in this small sample? It. Why is this word so rarely seen on language boards? Well, it's rarely seen on language boards because it's very difficult to illustrate. And we're also kind of been special edified, or E-D-U-C-A, or edified, by being taught to teach concepts, that the concept is more important. Well, what actually we're taught to teach is certain kinds of labeling and some other things, but I lost my track right there. It can, I was once giving a seminar, and a very wise and very successful in AAC special educator said, Bruce, never use it. She said, it doesn't mean anything. It has no referent. It's not worthwhile teaching. You see, she was thinking that you're teaching, when you teach a word, you're teaching a thing, like cup, phone. But you see, language is a system, and it doesn't mean anything, but it is like a zero in the number system. What's the difference between 1 and 1, 0? By her logic, there'd be no difference. 1, 0, 0, add as many zeros as you want. It doesn't mean anything. Well, of course, 0 plays a role within the system. Do you see what I mean? 0 plays a very important role within the system. And I think we need to represent it, and I think we need to represent it early. And I think we need to give kids access to those words they build pivot grammars around. And if they're already 6 or 7 years old, I think we need to help them start building their own little pivot grammars, because I assure you, when they do the interactive part of that, all of that stuff will fall into place in their heads. Okay, but this word is rarely seen on language boards because quite often we don't think about language. Do you see what I mean? We think about other things, not the system of language, and it's a word's role in language. The fact that it is a key pivot. Why is it a key pivot? Because it can be used to describe anything, and its subject and object forms are the same. It is crying out to be used as a pivot. It's hide it. Put it away. So, as you're using put, you need a pivot to put, you see what I mean? Like put it away, that put away. You see, the it is the pivot that holds that together. Okay. Now, this is the last example of child sophistication I'm going to give you, and this is a doozy of child sophistication. That's Daddy's nose. Now, this was at 21 to 30 months. There were 3 children in Brown's study. There was Adam, Eve, and Sarah. Eve was the most precocious, Adam second, and then Sarah was the third. So it would be Sarah going, you see, this one was 18 months, that would have been Sarah, that would have been Eve, and 27 months would have been Sarah. You see, they all took 3 months. Eve was 21 months coming into stage 2, and Sarah was 3 months coming into stage 2, and Sarah was 3 months. Sarah and Eve have graduated from Ivy League schools, and so this is utterly normal development. They all got to the same place at the end, and so whether you start this at 21 months or at 30 months, these kids were utterly normal, and they all went on to have university careers, and this was done in the early 70s, so these guys are now, middle-aged. And okay, but let's take a look at this. That's Daddy's nose. What is remarkable about that? Well, first, the child distinguishes between S as a possessive and S as a contraction for is. That's pretty neat. That's Daddy's nose. But that isn't all that's going on here. There are 2 types. There are 2 S sounds. One is called voiced, which is Z, and one is called voiceless, which is S. It'll show you this with T's and D's. Duh. You say it after me. Duh. Do you hear your vocal cords vibrating with duh? Try to say duh without vibrating your vocal cords. Got. Matt's nose. Got. Matt's nose. Who's got? And in that case, the apostrophe S for is would be voiced. Who's got Matt's nose? Am I going too fast? This is a lot of stuff to keep in your head. I'll just do this. This stands for is, this stands for is, this is the possessive. This is the possessive. So it's very clever that the kids know that this sound can be either is or it can be a possessive. That's clever enough at 21 months. But even more clever, the kid knows that if the is preceded by a vowel, it's going to be a voiced whose, and if it's preceded by a voiceless consonant, it's going to be voiceless. Going to be voiced, whose, voiceless. Is this possessive voiced or voiceless? It's voiceless. Why? Because Matt, T, so it's voiceless. But here this possessive is voiced because it's preceded by a vowel. So not only do kids know the rules about S's being either forms of contracted forms of is, but they also know that when they're smack up against another word, that the S will take its voicing come from the preceding sound. Folks, that's very complex. And, little Eve was doing that at 21 months. And they were all doing it by 30 months. And if you'll listen to any child who's typically developing, they'll be doing it. And even children with language delays almost never make an error here. How can that be? Well, it's obvious they didn't learn this. You see what I mean? That this is biologically driven. And all I want to say is that we've got to give our kids some opportunities to wade around down in there so they can produce sentences of their own and hear this stuff. Because when they're producing sentences of their own, they're going to start hearing stuff you're doing. And it's okay. Note the use of ing and on in the stage 2. Okay, stage 3. What I want to say about stage 3 is very simple. It's that questions and negatives in English require more than question words and no and not. For instance, I ate in the cafeteria yesterday. What's the negative of that? I didn't eat in the cafeteria yesterday. What's the question form of that? Did you or did I eat in the cafeteria yesterday? It can't be I ate not in the cafeteria yesterday. And it can't be ate I in the cafeteria yesterday. So when most questions, almost all questions involve a form of an auxiliary, but most questions necessitate the use of do, does, and did. So when you're doing a language board as opposed to a communication, we put who, what, where, why, when, and how, and no and not, and we think we've done our duty by questions and negatives, right? But if we haven't done the do's and the dids, we haven't, if we're leading the child forward into language. She likes gummy bears. What's the negative of that? She doesn't like gummy bears. What's the question form of that? Does she like gummy bears? Okay. Who likes gummy bears? I don't know, but she doesn't. Okay, so folks, with questions, you got to give your do's and your dids. And that's all I wanted to say here, and we're about 8 or 9 minutes late. And we'll come back at 10 till 10 till 1. Okay, is this all coming through clearly? What I'm trying to say is that language is the essence, and when we come back, I'm going to talk to you about how to represent core vocabulary in a way that's accessible to non-readers. But let's resume by starting. Let's resume with a kind of summary, and then a couple of cartoons. Let's just refresh our mind. Core vocabulary dominates everyday speech. We're clear on that, right? Yeah. Core vocabulary is the same across populations and environments. And that's really kind of different from what we think about in terms of AAC, where we do a different vocabulary for each environment and topic. But core is steady throughout. The language young children use has the same grammatical structures as adult language. We went through a lot of that stuff. I mean, who's got Matt's nose and that's Daddy's nose, shows what kind of terrific processing is being done up there. And it's the same thing that adults do. And the part of the brain that's used for this kind of stuff is not the part of the brain we use to learn the states, the names of the states and their capitals. It's very hard to test. It's not like nouns, where you can just sort of show a picture of a beaver and say, what's that? Okay. These structures become apparent at the age of 18 months. These grammatical structures become apparent at the age of 18 months in typically developing children and are dominated by core vocabulary. Remember we talked about the pivot languages that they make up? And, that's, okay. People with cognitive limitations who speak use core vocabulary and follow typical language structures, agent, action, object, and appropriate modifiers to the degree that they put them in. I mean, you aren't going to get someone who's cognitively impaired to say, here, over. If they use that at all, they're going to say, over here. Do you see what, okay. Okay, now this is from the New Yorker, of course, it says so, but this is what I think we have done with many of our AAC users, is the reason this guy's come to the doctor is he can't talk, and the doctor's looking at this, and no, I'm just making that up, and he says your vocabulary is enlarged. And if we have hundreds of pages of vocabulary, that most of it is made for specific environments and specific times, you're going to have a hard time talking. Okay, your vocabulary is enlarged. And this one, of course, I'm sorry, you have the wrong language. The idea here is that, I mean, I'm sure you experienced that here, but I know this is some Midtown Manhattan doctor in retirement answering the phone. It's from the New Yorker again, and it has that harried look New Yorkers often have, and plus the Brooks Brothers shirts, and but the thing is, we don't have the wrong language. I mean, language is what unites us, which enables us to communicate. And I mean, I've been in sessions where people were talking about language and people with disabilities, and they'll say, everyone has their own language. Haven't you heard that kind of stuff? Everyone needs their own, you know what I mean? And I don't think that's a good understanding. Everyone may use the language structures in a way that's native to them, but they use the same language structures and vocabulary that we do for almost everything they say. And so this business about hyper-differentiation of environments is I think, kind of defeating. Okay.